Russian forces have seized the Ukrainian town of Pobeda. And while this may not mean much for the battlefield, is it a troubling sign of things to come? I'm Paul, U.S. Army combat veteran. Let's talk about it. So this is one of the larger stories here of the day. You can see outside of Marinka. For those of you might know that Marinka is about 30 to 50 kilometers south of Avdiivka. And you can see here, right, being fought by 5th Separate Motor Rifle Regiment, 150 Motor Rifle Division, and 103rd Motor Rifle Regiment by the Russian forces. But you can see over the last maybe 48 hours, they've moved into they've advanced somewhat into these open fields and then sort of thrust down this road into Pobeda. Now, Pobeda itself, you can see, is not much to look at. It's a small village of 4 roadways, basically 4 side streets crossing this roadway. And it's not really the gateway to anywhere. You can see there are a lot of open fields to any of these regions here, Pereskokoiva, Herohivka, right? None of this is really on the road to anywhere. And it's of little tactical significance. And I sort of suspect that if you're a Ukrainian commander, you probably were like, listen, we're not going to hold this tiny, isolated village in the middle of nowhere. This simply isn't worth it. And look, how would you even resupply the town, right? There's no resupply points other than just this roadway, this single road into the town. So I kind of understand where the overall theater commanders are coming from by abandoning this village. But here's the thing. Here's what I think is more troubling, is that for Russia, this town, and I'm going to try to look it up on Google Maps here. The troubling part is that Russia was able to take it at all, right? And what I mean by that is that, okay, let's see if we can find it here. Okay, so here's the actual town. Here's the actual town of Pobeda. And as you can see, there's not a ton here. There's 1, 2, 3, right? A couple of streets. This appears entirely residential. And you can see the road leading to it, right? Basically a large empty field. Now, there's 2 things about this that are troubling. The first is, of course, the fact that Ukraine is looking at towns like this and yielding them to Russian forces without much in the line of a fight. And while it tactically might make sense, it's also a sign of the fact that Ukraine is having to make tougher and tougher choices about where they choose to fight. But what's more troubling to me is that normally Russian forces are exhausted by these major offensive actions. Normally, Russian forces have to throw everything they have to make forward progress, especially in places like Avdiivka, right? We know that Avdiivka cost them a tremendous number of manpower and personnel, worse allegedly than even the Battle of Bakhmut. And just 72 hours after Avdiivka falls into Russian control, they're able to continue substantive offensive operations. And that, to me, is the most troubling sign, that Russian command, Russian armed forces are able to go on offense even after a major offensive action has culminated. So you see stuff like that, and I worry that it means that Ukrainian armed forces, who themselves are undersupplied and exhausted, are going to have to deal with Russian offensive actions that just keep coming. And the responsibility for this falls, I think, first and foremost onto the U.S. Congress, who, pledged to support Ukraine in this conflict. And, if the U.S. support was only going to last 2 years, they should have told Ukraine that. They should have said that this stuff is contingent, but they didn't, right? They pledged that we'll support you until you've beaten Russian aggression. That has proven untrue, right? We're unable to pass any sort of aid deal to the Ukrainians. It's been basically blocked by Mike Johnson, the Speaker of the House. But also Europe shares also a responsibility for this. And while Europe doesn't have large militaries like the United States does, Europe still has a large defense industrial base. It has as many people and as large an economy as the United States. So to sit there and be like, oh, the U.S. are the only people who can provide material support to the Ukrainian armed forces. This is simply untrue, right? The Europeans have certainly the money, certainly the capacity to do it, but their years, decades of underinvestment in their national defense has meant that as a group, as a bloc, the EU is unable to even provide basic material support to Ukraine. They're unable to close the gap, so to speak. And again, if we look at like as a percentage of GDP, there's exceptions. Poland, for example, provided a tremendous amount of aid. Germany also provides a substantial amount of aid, but it's all dwarfed by the U.S., which, remember, the U.S. is not spending half of its defense budget on countering this major global rival in Russia. It's spending 3 to 5% of its defense expenditures on this, right? So I say this because, again, 5% to exterminate the Russian military is a great deal, right? It's hard to overstate how good a deal this is to achieve, basically to grind the Russian military to dust. The problem is, of course, the U.S. has not had any wins lately, and the West, frankly, has not had any military wins. They've looked like a feckless and ineffective partner. They look weak in an era where countries like China and Russia, who aren't hobbled by democracy, they pride themselves on being strong and effective in the face of conflict. And when the West, despite having these huge economies, have such weak and fragile political structures that they're unable to actually follow through with a commitment and support, it's a bad sign, right? It's a bad sign for Ukraine, and it's a bad look for the West, right? It makes all of our other allies doubt us. Remember, the U.S., we abandoned the Kurds in Kurdistan. We abandoned the Iraqis in Iraq. We abandoned our Afghan allies, and now we are abandoning the Ukrainians. So nothing quite like making friends and then ditching them. Again, anyway, if you guys are interested in some of the combat footage coming out of Pobeda, I'm going to do an uncensored analysis of that footage, right? We're going to look at it. That war content on YouTube gets basically no sponsors. So I depend on you guys to enable me and the team to continue to do this. So that's all I got. I'll see you guys in the next one. Of course, thanks to all the members of CombatVetNews.com. Hit like and subscribe on the video. Tell the YouTube algorithm this is good content. And I'll see you guys in the next one.